I'm Barbara Peters. Welcome to another episode in our ever-crowded criminal calendar. We have with us today a special treat, author Aaron Elkins.
Hi, Barbara. Thank you for having me.
It's really nice to see you back. It's a special treat for me to have Aaron come to visit because, dear to my heart forever, he was the first author that ever came and signed books for the Poison Pen.
Yep.
1990.
Had to pay my way, too.
That's right. It's another reason you're dear to my heart. We were a baby bookstore and anxious to test our wings in what has turned out to be actually our principal function, which is offering readers and authors personal connections. I was a mad fan of Aaron's books, and even more important, my mother, a store critic, was insane and always has been, still is insane, about The Dark Place.
Yeah, people do. Oh, no, I met a woman last night who did not finish The Dark Place because she thought I treated the abominable snowman poorly. And that's the first time I've run into that, yeah.
Well, actually, I hadn't even considered the treatment because in mysteries you do expect people to get bashed around. But the concept of it is just so remarkably offbeat.
Oh, yeah, you know, I wish I could write that book again. But of course, you can't write a book again, and there's nowhere to go with it.
No.
You know, that's the logical end.
Absolutely. In fact, I remember Mother speaking to you at the BoucherCon in San Diego. It was the year before I opened the bookstore, and she commented to you how much she liked the book. And I remember you said to her, an author only gets that idea, an idea that good, you said, once in a lifetime.
Yeah.
Although I think your other books have been wonderful since. I think that may be the most original idea.
Well, you know, the reason is I didn't know what I was doing. You and I have talked about this more than once. I don't think mystery when I write or thriller when I write. Whatever book writes itself seems to write itself. And the first book I did seemed to be kind of a spy book, I guess, after the fact.
And that was Fellowship of Fear.
That Fellowship of Fear. And The Dark Place was the second book, and that seemed to be a kind of a, I'm not sure. I still don't know. A kind of an adventure, really. Not a thriller.
Right. It's kind of a mystery in the sense that there are unknown things that have to be solved. Your guy, Gideon Oliver, with the skeleton detective or the bone doctor, has a mystery in this presence in the Olympic rainforest. Right. So you do have that, but it's also a chase in the sense that, you know, it's not like there was a body in the library and here's Gideon. It's a moving target out there.
But I tell you, if I had to think out ahead of time what kind of book I'm writing and where it's going to go on the shelves, I would not be writing books. I mean, I couldn't work that way. The story just seems to come, not quite as easily as that, but I follow the storyline. Where it goes, and when it's finished, and then when it's done, I wait for people to tell me what I wrote.
Well, and we'll get to that. But just to finish my original thought, because The Dark Place was a family favorite, and Old Bones, your next book, is one of my all-time favorites. When we got to Icy Clutches, which is the 1990 book, I was just really anxious to have a chance to have you here at the store and here in Scottsdale rather and talk about it. So you came, and I remember the Scottsdale Artist School in their old location hosted the event, and there were at least 100 people that came, and I was just, I thought, you know, we're in with a chance, we're a success. And it's been like that ever since.
It was at the Scottsdale Artist School. I remember that as one of my great speaking triumphs because they supplied some skulls. Do you remember? Because I was talking about bones. And so I was able to, just out of nowhere, pull up a skull and say, this is the skull of a black female aged approximately 27 years old. And somebody in the audience says, how do you know that? And I said, well, it's the anthropologist's trick. You look at what it says on the back of the skull, and it said black female aged 27 years old. That was wonderful.
I'd forgotten about that. It brought the house down. That was so much fun, and I think it's lovely and symmetrical that the new book that you've come to sign this year, Loot, is going to be an event hosted again by the Scottsdale Artist School, but in their new location. So this is our 10th anniversary year, and it's a whole cycle.
Right. So maybe every time they move, I can come.
Or every 10 years. Well, going back to what you were saying about when you did Fellowship of Fear in the Dark Place, you just had a story and you wanted to tell it, and what kind of story didn't, pardon me, figure into it all that much for you in pulling in setting up the book. Do I remember right that you came to writing somewhat late?
Well, yeah, I was 47 when I started my first book, and even then it was somebody else's idea. I mean, I didn't think of it myself. It was my wife, Charlotte, who had to suggest it. It's very, when I talk to other writers, well, not mystery writers. Writers in general, I think, do get started early, in their 20s, or they want to be writers all their lives. But don't you think that with mystery writers, it's an older starting crowd? You know, I'm not so sure it's true right now, come to think of it.
Yeah,
there are a lot of younger authors, but when my first book came out in 1982, and at that time there were so many people who were coming off other careers and beginning to write late. Writers in general, I think, do get started, have always I never wanted to be, I can't say I never wanted to be a writer. I grew up in Brooklyn, New York, and in an area that it was a block from where Isaac Asimov lived, which I didn't know at the time. The reason I mention it is because Isaac Asimov said the Brownsville section of Brooklyn was a slum when I grew up there, and it's gone downhill ever since. And I thought, well, that's about right. But the thing is, it didn't seem to me in this slum that I was growing up in that writers were a different world. You know, they weren't, I had a friend who wanted to be an opera singer, unbelievable. Somebody else who wanted to be a baseball player, but I thought, no, baseball players and opera singers come from a different world than we inhabit. You know, little that I didn't know that Isaac Asimov, I didn't know that Irwin Shaw lived nearby, I didn't know that Norman Mailer, you know, it just seemed like something which would be out of my universe forever. And then I never really thought about it until I was 47, coming back from 2 years of teaching overseas for the University of Maryland's European programs. And didn't have a job to come back to. And it was Charlotte who said, well, you're pretty good with words, why don't you write a book? Just like that.
And how brilliant she was. But you've done, this is another thing I've always thought interesting, that most writers seem to have done a selection of things.
Yeah, well, it looks great on a flap of a book, because you know, I drove a truck, was a boxer for a while, and I was those things, did this, did that. So maybe there's some part of us that's thinking about how it's going to look on the jacket of a book, and you want it to look like a writer's biography.
Actually, I've always thought of it as that you need to acquire the luggage in order to have something to say.
Yeah, and I think that's part of the reason that so many writers do start young. It would take a lot to make me pick up a book by a 19-year-old. I mean, I like 19-year-olds, but I feel
what can they say?
Yeah. Stephen Crane being an exception and a few other people, but yeah, what can they say?
Well, 47 is from my current perspective, pretty young guy.
Pretty young too.
Nonetheless, here you are, and you've done this interesting amount of stuff. But academically, you are a physical anthropologist,
Yeah.
right? And I remember that you got your master's degree at the University of
Got
Arizona.
my master's at Arizona, yeah, and then went on to Wisconsin for a doctorate, and was one of those sad, everything but the dissertation stories. I never did get it, and then 20 years later I went back to the university. Well, 19 years later I went back to California State and got another master's degree in psychology, and then a few years after that got a doctorate in, I don't think you even know this, in adult education. That's what my doctorate is in.
No, I assumed it was
Oddly
physical
enough,
anthropology.
yeah.
Ah.
But I never used it in any vocational way, and taught physical anthropology for many years.
So it would seem natural, if the old maxim, write what you know,
Sure.
holds true, that when you decided, or when you had a story that you wanted to tell, that a physical anthropologist would suggest itself as the protagonist.